Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join Axonex today on this webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by George Basie from Duo to provide an overview and demonstration of Duo security and how Duo's multi-factor authentication resolves the challenges around trusted access to applications. I'm pleased to say this is the first webinar in the SUPERCHARGED program. So for those of you who are new to SUPERCHARGED, and by means of a very brief introduction, the SUPERCHARGED program is a free course of events, webinars designed to provide advice and thought leadership on the latest technologies and trends that we're seeing in the industry, and to help overcome challenges, particularly around digitization that we're seeing amongst our customers. And we brought in some fantastic speakers from all areas of the industry to support the program. So I'd like to welcome you to our first SUPERCHARGED webinar, which will be one of several focusing on cybersecurity. So why are we hosting this webinar today? The evolving world of cloud-based applications, remote working, and device mobility has created a huge security problem for IT teams. And as the technology has evolved, so have the threats and cyber attacks that are becoming increasingly more sophisticated and frequent. It's no surprise that more than 80% of breaches start on the endpoint and frequently result from an attacker sort of logging into a customer application using stolen passwords, often due to phishing. So access to applications is absolutely critical, in the truest sense of the word, and for any teams to do their job. And as an IT team, we want to give employees seamless access to applications and a better user experience, not one that's kind of slow and complicated and encumbers productivity. So that's why today we're discussing Duo security for multi-factor authentication. Duo has made waves in the market with its easy and simple ability to provide secure access to any user connecting to any application on any device. So we expect the webinar to last about 40 minutes. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along, or if you type the question into the Q&A box, we'll make sure that those questions are answered at the end. And at the end, there will also be time to ask further questions. So without sort of further delay, I'll just pass you over to George from Duo.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Richard. And to echo Richard's sentiment, thanks a lot to everyone who's jumped on. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about Axonex and Duo and the partnership and solution we're offering. So let me just share out my screen here. You should all be able to see an agenda slide now, but please shout if that's not the case. So by way of an introduction, I'm one of the partner managers here at Duo. So I work closely with Richard and the team at Axonex. Part of my job is kind of discussing Duo with our partners' customer base, which is obviously the role I'm here to do today. So I can provide you with an introduction to Duo as a company, although I'll keep that brief. And then I can provide you with an overview of what we mean by trusted access, which is the kind of overarching term that we've given to our solution. And then we can discuss what that encompasses and specifically the products that includes and how we meet the challenges that we'll discuss. We can wrap up with some next steps and a Q&A at the end. But as Richard said, if you guys have any questions as we go through, there's the chat window which you can use. But I'm very much open to taking any questions or comments that you might have as we go through. I think we have, a good enough audience size where we can accommodate that. And I'm sure any kind of points you want to make will be valuable for the other attendees as well. So, as I said, I won't spend too long on this slide, but for any of you that are new to Duo or are not too familiar with us, I thought this would be a useful information to share with you to provide some context on Duo as a company and where we've come from. So Duo was founded in 2010, so we've been around close to a decade now, just shy of. We're founded in the US, in Michigan. We have another 2 offices out there. We've had an office in London for about 4 years now. And you're probably aware, you've probably read it or seen it somewhere, that we were acquired by Cisco towards the end of last year. So in an eight-year spell, the company grew hugely. We sold for 2.35 billion, so amassed kind of a huge valuation in that time as well. And that was really due to the things that we'll discuss throughout this session in terms of Duo was able to provide a security service that was really easy for administrators to deploy and manage, and really easy for end users to actually use without putting unnecessary kind of burden on them and impacting their productivity. And that's why Duo as a company and the service we offer is really well respected, not just in security, but across the kind of IT industry, and particularly the SaaS industry in general. And you can see that's reflected in a couple of the stats here, like our Net Promoter Score. If you're familiar with those, 70 plus is exceptionally high, and our customer satisfaction rating, of course, as well. All right. So over the next few slides, I just want to give you a background, I suppose, as to the challenge that we're trying to solve with Duo, what we mean by trusted access, and how two-factor authentication fits within that. So this may not be brand new material for anyone on this call, or at least some of you, so please bear with me, but it should help in kind of setting the context before we discuss Duo-specific challenges, so that you have a good understanding of exactly why we provide these products and what we're trying to do with them, and the challenge that which we're facing here. And in doing so, it often helps to kind of take a step back and look at how security was traditionally approached. And that was typically by leveraging a perimeter-based security model using a firewall. So organizations would build a trusted internal network that protected them from any external threats. And in this instance, that model worked really effectively when all of the applications and servers that need to be protected were actually behind that perimeter and on the network. And similarly, the users that were accessing them were also on the network, and the endpoints that they were using in order to access them likewise were on the network. They were owned and essentially managed by IT. So the surface attack area in this instance was pretty small. It was limited to users who had to be at a certain place at a certain time, often getting access to a building that had physical security controls. There obviously was physical visibility over the user as well, and they were using endpoints that the IT and security teams had perfect visibility of. If they needed to push out patches to them, they could do so, for example. They knew the security controls that were in place. But over the past couple of decades, networking has become a lot more complex as we've become more reliant on the internet and cloud-based services. And that's really redefined that perimeter that we spoke about in the previous slide. In some cases, it's removed it altogether. And that was this has really been brought about by a kind of business and consumer need for better usability, better mobility, and better flexibility in the way that IT services and software was consumed. And in turn, that's kind of blurred the lines between people's personal tech and their corporate technology as well. So it's led to it's led to a situation in which we don't have distinct boundaries between inside and outside of the network or the perimeter, because information is being exchanged across users that are both on the network and out the network. They could be using their personal devices, they could be using corporate devices. So they're exchanging all this information across different networks altogether. So that old perimeter and security model is no longer as effective. And the two key trends we see here, resulting from this kind of adoption in cloud applications and users using their own personal technology, is that we now have an increasing number of remote workers. So one day your workers and employees might be at the office, but the next day they could be working from home, or they could be working while they're traveling, or from a coffee shop or a library, wherever they feel they'll be most productive. And increasingly now, not just using the endpoint or laptop that you provide them with, they could be using their personal phone, laptop, tablet, for example. And you probably all have and most users have an expectation that they'll have this flexibility to work from anywhere at any time on the device that they choose in order to be as productive as possible. And in order for your businesses to be kind of as efficient and agile as possible, you probably want to enable those things as well. The challenge is, how do we enable those things, giving your users the flexibility they need and allowing your business to be as efficient as possible without compromising security? Because from the situation in which you have perfect visibility of the users and endpoints, now the only thing preventing access, for example, or protecting access to Office 365 is just a username and password, unless there are other security measures in place. And we know that usernames can easily be found out or guessed, and we know that passwords on their own are easily compromised and are frequently compromised. Additionally, now we're exposing our networks, people's personal devices. We don't know if they have the necessary security controls in place. We also don't know if the software on them is up to date, so we're exposing ourselves to risk in that way as well. And these are the two key challenges that we're trying to hone in on at Duo. So our goal is to provide organizations with a solution that meets these two challenges in a way that's really easy to deploy and manage and doesn't put any additional burden on the end user, while taking a kind of huge step to improving your security posture. So if you can tackle these two key things, you're tackling the two leading causes of breaches, as this slide demonstrates. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the vast majority of breaches involve compromised credentials. And Richard mentioned this already. I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone. And it's really not surprising when you think about it. Like, people nowadays will simplify their passwords in an effort to remember them, because they have so many to remember now for different services. People will duplicate a single password across all of their systems, again, in an effort to remember them and simplify things. But the problem is when one of those systems is hacked and the password is leaked, anyone who has access to that effectively has the keys to the kingdom, as it were, for that user, whether they're accessing their personal applications or your workplace applications. Additionally, we see an increase in phishing attacks and other social engineering attacks which any business could face. And I speak to partners on a weekly basis where one of their customers has been breached due to a phishing attack. So that's something that's become increasingly common as well. And that doesn't even, we're not even discussing here brute force attacks or any attacks of that nature either. So it's really not surprising that so many breaches involve compromised credentials. But the good news is there's such an easy way in which we can mitigate that risk. All we need to do is add a second layer of protection by verifying that user identity with a second factor authentication before we grant them access to the app or network that they're trying to access. And that's what we do with Duo's two-factor authentication service, of course. So in addition to that password, before we grant them access to the app, we're actually using something that they physically have in their possession before we grant them access. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes' time. Additionally, we find that 3/4 of breaches involved compromised devices. And I should say these stats are from Verizon's recent data breach report, which is available online. And by that, we just mean that the poor security health of the device was exploited at some point during that breach. And that could be anything from an out-of-date browser or out-of-date plugin being exploited, or it could just be someone not having the necessary security controls on their device. For instance, not having PIN code or biometric protection on their phone. They leave it at a coffee shop, it gets into the wrong hands, and then the data exposed that way. Again, really easy fix. We just need to verify that we trust that device before we grant it access to an application. So you can say, if it doesn't have PIN code protection, we're not going to allow it to access this app. Or if the browser is over 20 days out of date, we'll do the same. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. But that essentially, in a nutshell, is the trusted access vision. We want to provide the organizations that work with us with the ability to verify that they trust the user who's trying to gain access to their applications, but also that we trust the device that they're using and that it meets our security standards. And one of the key differentiators with Duo to similar services in the market is the breadth of applications that we cover. Again, we'll talk about this in more detail later, but whether the apps are cloud-based or on-premises, we can provide a secure and consistent end-user experience there. So if anyone has any questions on that, then let me know. But otherwise, I'll move on and we can discuss those two components in more detail and how Duo is specifically approaching these problems with the features that we offer. And I should add at this point as well, I've kind of spoken in equal parts about the two-factor authentication piece and the device insight and controls piece to mitigate those risks we've discussed. But the Duo is best known for our two-factor authentication service, and that is the more popular functionality that we offer. And it's often the low-hanging fruit and how you can take the kind of quickest steps to improving your security posture. So we can spend a little more time discussing that with the time we've got on this session. So, as I said earlier, what we've discussed so far is probably not kind of revelatory to many people, but has set the scene. And everyone's familiar with two-factor authentication as well. And everyone knows that two-factor authentication is really important, and it has been for some time now. The difficulty was actually finding a two-factor authentication service that was easy enough to deploy and manage and was easy enough for end users without kind of impacting their productivity or putting undue burden on an IT help desk, because the legacy kind of traditional two-factor services were largely on-premises. They were it's quite heavy lift to stand them up and expensive to manage them in terms of the resources and the kit that was required. And they also relied on traditional hardware tokens, which users would have to actually remember to carry around with them and have in their possession in order to authenticate to their various services. And that was challenging for users because it's something they have to consciously think about. They would often forget them or lose them or break them, or they would get out of sync and they would need to take them to the help desk to rectify. So these are all challenges, and they were expensive to buy up front as well. What Duo has done really well is provide a cloud-based service, which is really easy to deploy and administer. And predominantly, and where possible, we want to leverage a user's existing device in order for them to authenticate to their app. So rather than having to remember a physical hardware token, why not leverage the smartphone they already have in their possession for them to verify their identity? So, and I'll show you a demonstration of this in a moment's time, but we prefer to use a mobile app and a push notification sent to that user's mobile for them to verify whether or not it is actually them, in fact, that's trying to access the application. And with that, it means that users can authenticate really quickly in just a couple of taps in order to approve the request. And you might be familiar with other authentication applications like Google Authenticator, for example, that require a code, a one-time passcode that needs to be used. And that can be frustrating as well, because you have to open the app, find the code, type it in, maybe refer back to the app. If it's at the end of that kind of 30-second or minute refresh cycle, you have to wait for it to refresh before you type it in. That can be a pain. Another thing with the mobile app is we can allow users to enroll themselves in the service, which keeps deployments really speedy as well. And I can actually show you a demonstration of this end user experience. So you'll see here, I'm just going to demo.duo.com. So this is publicly accessible. Any of you can revisit this after the session. Or revisit it with your account managers at Axonex when it comes to having these discussions. And you'll see there are some application-specific demos here, which you can access. And there are also some kind of general end-user workflow demos. And one of these is the Duo push workflow, which I'll show you now. So this is just kind of showcasing the standard two-factor authentication experience with Duo. It's using Outlook Web App as the example, but this would be identical across any web apps and similar for any other application you protect with Duo as well. So in this instance, the user It's just going to enter their primary credentials, their username and password as you would expect. But before they're granted access to the app, they arrive at this authentication prompt. And there are a couple of things to note here. You can customize this logo. It could be Axonex's logo, it could be your logo, whatever's going to be more kind of more familiar to the end user when they're kind of interacting with IT services. You will of course communicate when you roll out Duo to your customer or to your users, but if for any reason people have missed those communications, they can get some information on what exactly they're seeing here. There's some self-service capabilities here as well, so users can actually add a second device. There's no additional cost for that. We would always encourage users to add at least a second or third device so that if they don't have one of those devices in their possession, they can leverage another one. They'll have to verify identity with two-factor, of course, before they can do that. They can view their settings and existing devices, and they can do things from here like set up auto push, for example. So rather than having to choose between these options, they might say, every time I arrive at this prompt, just send me an auto push to my phone so that I can verify. I don't need to choose between the different options. And there's a need help link, so you can customize what's behind here in terms of where users will be sent to if they need any assistance. And for the authentication itself, the user will just pick from the device, pick from the list of devices of those that they've already enrolled, and then they'll pick the method by which they want to receive this request. And these methods reflect what you configure in your policy engine. So if you don't want to use callback option for users to authenticate, you can remove that. You can allow just push or one-time passcodes or whatever works best, whatever you think is the most secure and best for your organization. And sticking with push as the example here, you'll see the user will just hit that send me a push button. They receive their request on their phone. On my phone, I'd have to use a biometric. This is using the latest iOS operating system, of course. So this is using Face ID. So the user will just open this request, and in one tap, they can approve or deny it. So they'll get some information here on what app they're trying to access, where it's coming from. And, the vast majority of the time, they'll be expecting this request. They'll be at the office or they'll be at home trying to access their email, and they can just approve it straight away. If, however, they're not expecting it, it's probably because someone else, a malicious user, has got access to their password and is trying to access their email, in which case they can mark that as fraudulent, and that will notify any administrators tied to that account, whether it's members of the team from Axonex or members of your team, that this person's credentials have been compromised, and you can work with that user to remediate the risk there. Otherwise, as I said, they can just hit approve, and they'll gain access right through to the application. So I've, of course, slowed that down to talk through the prompt and the experience there. But as you can imagine, it's really simple. The user will just enter their primary credentials. They receive the request on their phone, and they tap to approve, and they're good to go. It's as easy as that. Again, any questions on that, do let me know. Otherwise, I will move swiftly on. All right. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that there are various authentication options which you can choose to allow or not for your users to leverage. So if, for example, you have users that you don't provide with company phones and they're really resistant for some reason to using a business-related application on their personal phone, we do have other options, like you can use SMS to send a one-time passcode, or you can use a phone callback option. We also support the traditional hardware tokens that I mentioned earlier. And we support more modern tokens as well, like universal two-factor. The best known manufacturer of them is Yubico. You might have used their YubiKeys or heard about their YubiKeys in the past. You can see the wearable option is pictured there as well. So there, we provide all the different options that you might need in order to ensure that you can protect all of your users, whether they're internal to your organization or external, perhaps they're contractors or customers that need to access one of your applications, for example. So you can provide with users with the flexibility there. And the other, aside from the kind of end user experience, the other key thing to mention here, which I touched on earlier, is the breadth of different apps that we cover. So this slide just gives you a sample of some of the more commonly protected apps in the various categories they fit within. So local Windows logons is a really popular application that's protected among our partner community. Other Microsoft apps, we already showed you the Outlook web app experience, Office 365, remote desktop, of course, RDP, various VPNs, cloud-based applications, on-premises applications. We can even integrate with identity providers to protect access to the applications that sit behind them, services like Okta, OneLogin, ADFS, Azure Active Directory, for example. And I'll show you very briefly in a moment our documentation site to familiarize you with that. But we have a number of kind of documented out-of-the-box integrations on that site, but we also have a range of custom kits that we can use to integrate with that. So if you look at that site and you think, oh, you know, they don't have a documented solution for this or integration for this, it means they don't protect it. That's not the case. We're very flexible. So if you have, for example, a VPN that isn't documented, but it supports Radius, we can use our generic Radius app to integrate with that. And it's the same for cloud apps that support SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. If they support that authentication standard, we can hook into it. If you have custom web apps, for example, you can use our Web SDK. There's also our APIs that you can use as well. So it's more than likely, as long as it's not accessed by a thick client, that Duo will be able to protect it. And I'll just show you this quickly, our documentation site, in case any of you want to do any kind of further reading on Duo. There's some various items here which will be of interest for you. There's an end user guide, there's an admin overview. Probably more relevant for you is the integration guide. So you can start reading about how we integrate with these various services. And these are grouped by types. You can see Microsoft, web apps, identity providers, cloud-based services. So you can read all about these application integrations and how we do that. So if you have an interest in a particular app, I'd encourage you to review that. If you want to read about our generic integrations, you can see here, for example, under the VPN section, you can read about our generic Radius app and how we can integrate with any apps that support that standard. All right, so that pretty much concludes what I was hoping to cover on the two-factor authentication front. Hopefully that's provided you with a good introduction to the end user experience there, how users can authenticate with the various methods and the applications that you can protect with Duo. Now, on the device piece, the really nice thing is that for any apps that you're protecting with Duo, we can actually audit the devices that are being used. So you can gather information on the software they're running and the security controls. So on the software front, things like what version of the operating system, the browser plugins, and on the security controls, you can see, does this phone have PIN code protection, biometric protection? Has it been tampered with? Does it have disk encryption, for example? And you can gather all this data, and using that, you can kind of build a baseline for what you consider to be secure and compliant with your policies. And you can also build policies to ensure that if these devices are not compliant, that you can block access them if you deem them to be really insecure, or in fact, you can just encourage users to remediate them before they get to that stage. So for example, you might build a policy that says, of course, if a user's browser is fully up to date, that's great. We'll allow them to gain access to the app. If it's up to 20 days out of date, we're just going to warn them that we'd like them to update their device and that their browser is not out of date. It would be best security practice to update it. And look, it's 5 days out of date currently. You have 15 days left to update it before access is blocked from this device. And by doing so, you're finding the right balance between security and user convenience, so that user can find the right time to update their device and remain secure without kind of causing them undue burden and impact in their day-to-day. And where this becomes really effective is where you have a BYOD policy, so you're enabling users to use their own personal devices, but perhaps you've sacrificed some of that visibility and control that you had previously before you enabled BYOD, when all your employees were using your kind of managed or corporate endpoints. Because I speak with customers all the time that might have written policies that say, if you're going to use your personal device, you need to keep it up to date, or you need to have these controls on, or in fact, you can't even access these applications on your personal devices. It's not allowed. But they don't actually have any way of auditing that that's the case or controlling that behavior. So these policies and this visibility allows you to do that. On the other hand, you may have been resistant to enabling users to use their personal devices because you had these concerns. You didn't want to give up the visibility and control that you currently have. But that might be at the expense of users' productivity and kind of freedom and flexibility. So you can do that safe in the knowledge now that you won't lose that control. And this kind of reiterates the point I made earlier, and that you can find the right balance between security and an end user convenience. If I go back to this demo site here, unfortunately, this is actually slightly out of date. It needs updating, but it should give you a flavor at least. So this user's trying to access Office 365. Their browser's 20 days out of date, and they're just being told, look, your browser's out of date. Let's update it. And it'll say your Firefox browser's out of date. That's a security concern for us. We recommend the latest version. Here's how to update it. Not that it's complex to update the browser anyway, but this is just the example. And the more modern, and my experience with Duo today is I'll just be told, look, your browser's 20 days out of date. You have 10 days left to update it. And if they fail to do that, as is the case in this instance, the user's just being told, sorry, access isn't allowed because you're out of date software. See what is allowed. And again, they can just go through and do that. And that covers off the two key elements that we've been discussing here in terms of mitigating the risk of breaches due to compromised credentials and passwords being leaked, but also breaches involving compromised devices by enabling you to verify that you trust those devices. There are a few different editions of Duo. I'm not going to speak through these in detail because your representatives at Axonex will be able to do that. But essentially, the MFA edition provides full two-factor authentication, no limitations here on the number or type of apps that you can protect. The Access edition gives you the full detailed visibility into devices. So you can start identifying and monitoring risky devices, encouraging users to update those, and blocking access to any device that you deem to be insecure. And the Beyond edition takes that one step further, and that you can then also differentiate between corporate and personal devices. And for particularly sensitive apps, you might want to limit access just to corporate devices. For instance, if you have users accessing your file syncing and sharing system, like OneDrive or Box or Dropbox, for example, you might want to limit access to corporate devices just so you know you retain control of those documents if they're downloaded, for example. All right, I hope that's been useful in kind of setting the scene on Duo, the challenge we're trying to solve, how we go about solving that challenge with the specific products that we offer. We offer a 30-day free trial, which you can take advantage of. And as a next step and kind of call to action of this session, I would encourage you to reach out to Richard, Tim, or your account managers at Axonex to understand more about how you can get that set up. And they'll be able to work with you on configuring that, to get your account ready, add a couple of key applications, talk you through how you would add a few users that you want to test with, play around with the different policies and controls that are available there to experience the different workflows and how that impacts your users. But yeah, aside from that, I am open to any questions or comments, feedback that you might have. And if there are none, I guess I'll pass back to Richard.
we've got one question, George, on the Q&A. So what's required from the customer in terms of equipment if they want to offer the callback service?
The callback service? Nothing. There are a couple of pieces of software that you may need to install with Duo. For example, we have a Duo Authentication proxy that we use to integrate with any on-premises applications or directories. If you're syncing from on-premises Active Directory, for example, you can read about that in this guide here if you want to. But for callback services, no infrastructure is required at all.
Okay.
Great.
Brilliant. And we've got one more question. So what happens if a user accidentally says the access was fraudulent on their mobile app by mistakenly pressing the wrong button? Does it lock access? Does it lock access to the device?
So, okay, so they are legitimately trying to access their application, but they accidentally deny it? Is that the question?
Yeah.
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 I mean, nothing happens. If they mark it as a mistake, you know, the authentication just won't go through, and then they can log in again with their username and password and go through the process again. If they notify their administrator that it's marked as fraudulent, you know, you'd expect the administrators to contact that user, and they can just explain that it was a mistake and they didn't mean to do that, and that's it. And then again, they can go through the process. Like if a hacker is trying to access their app and has their password, they can do that as many times as they want, but the user will always, you would expect them to deny it, of course, until they reset their password, which you would hope they would do after the first time. So if they mark it as fraudulent, if they accidentally deny it, there's no problem there. They can just go through and send the request again and approve it.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Yeah, so unless there's any more questions, just like to wrap things up. So, yeah, if you've got any more questions about Duo, or you're interested in looking at a trial, please contact your account manager at Axonex to just provide a little bit more information. So thank you for taking the time to attend. Really appreciate it. Please take a look out and for upcoming events from SUPERCHARGED, particularly around cybersecurity, but also as well on some other topics, including data center, cloud, networking, and collaboration. Next Tuesday, we're joined by John Johnson, Cisco CTO, to talk to us about digitization and sort of mindset and tactics required to sort of compete in the digital marketplace. So yeah, just to wrap up, George, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation today. And again, thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me. Good to speak to you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.